we might just get started. Well, one, I want to introduce, for those of you who don't know him, this is Peter Marks, a critic at the Washington Post. Hi, Peter.
Nice to see
Uh,
you.
Nice to see you. Thanks for being here.
Pleasure.
Uh, and then also with us is Rebecca Walls. Rebecca Walls is a directing MFA candidate at Carnegie Mellon right now. And she worked with us over the summer on the development workshops of a couple of our pieces. And then we'll be joined intermittently by some of the playwrights and other artists. But we'll go ahead and get started. So I thought we might first start off with sort of what we did and what we, trying to remember, Peter, back, 6 months ago, which in COVID time is 6 years ago. But what happened was I asked Peter if he might be interested in joining Solus Nua for the rehearsal and workshop process of our brand new digital theater pieces. I thought, hey, Peter, come join us. No one knows how to make a digital play just yet. So this might be an interesting piece to write about. And Peter asked, well, how many can I attend? Can I come to all of the rehearsals? And I was like, well, let's talk about that. So eventually what happened is Peter was with us throughout the development workshop process and then throughout nearly our daily rehearsals creating the show. And then he just now tonight saw the first full performance and is writing his review about it. So one of our conversations that we've just been having in addition to creating this piece is what is a new model for theater criticism, and how can we, our whole industry is at a pause right now as we're thinking of, well, there's so many questions that we could be thinking about for better practices, for innovative practices in the future. And theater criticism is certainly one of those. And it first occurred to me, Peter, in an early conversation when you and I were chatting about this, when you said, well, theater criticism is dying. And that took me by surprise because I always selfishly, of course, think that the phrase is, well, the theater has been dying, as we say, for hundreds of years. And so it was a nice wake-up call for me, from our colleagues who are involved in the theater industry, but from a different perspective of, well, they're having trouble too. How do we all work together to create a healthier ecosystem, to create greater conversations between artists, between critics? And I was just so happy, Peter, that you joined us for this process.
Yeah, no, I was fascinated. Now, of course, Trevor the Maltese has decided he wants to chew on something that squeaks. I really, and it was just a cheap ploy to get people to look at my little cube, for me
Yes,
to
there you
dog.
go.
I'm going to take his toy away from him like an equal critic. But okay. So yeah, so I was thrilled at the idea. First of all, I do think it's interesting that we're in this interregnum, in this pause, trying to figure out what theater is going to be like, what it can be like when there are no stages open, and also what the relationship between people who write about the theater and people who do the theater, how that evolves. Because for one thing, social media has changed the relationships between theater artists and people who, like myself, who review theater, just because I have a lot more contact day to day with people in the industry, and they react more directly. We can talk to each other about the issues. People can tell me what kinds of things they want to see written about, and maybe what they don't want to see written about. So all those things seem to be in the mix. And so when Rex said, come watch the whole process, I was like, oh, that's like manna to a person in my job, to get to see how the sausage is made. And I learned a tremendous amount just being a fly on the wall over these months, and even seeing the end product tonight from where it all started 6 months ago is remarkable. And I need to sort of process it, because at the very beginning, which Rebecca was part of. She was the first assistant director of the production. Mikola Sridhar became the assistant director when Rebecca went off to Carnegie Mellon, where she's now a student, grad student. But the process of watching a play is a great experience. And I would advise this company that did this so generously to maybe make this, a part of a process that more people can experience. I know that you open that up. Some companies open up open rehearsals to board members, but I wonder if access like this, the transparency, doesn't change in a weird way the joy of seeing the finished product and the surprise of finally seeing the whole thing put together. I purposely did not watch any of the dress rehearsals. I sort of stepped away near the end of the process, but to have watched the evolution and then that surprising ending, which I wasn't really totally cognizant of, where you go back to the WhatsApp totally, which I thought was almost the most thrilling part of the production in some ways. Just in that silence to be feeling the final moments of the play was felt like very much a finale that wouldn't have happened had you not gone through the journey of 6 months trying to figure out how to make this thing work. So for all those reasons, it was a wonderful experience.
That's so interesting that you said about opening up this process to more people. I'm so interested in demystifying the artistic process of I think so many actors, one of the industry jokes is we complain about when people say, how do you memorize all those lines? And it's like, it's so much more than memorizing lines. But maybe the throw that back on the artist is, what have you done to explain what you do? Because what we see is you talking for an hour, and that's impressive. And so what are other ways that we can reinvent and demystify the process? That's so interesting to think about.
I have a question for you, Rex, and for Rebecca.
And John, by the way, John King just joined the room.
Hi, John.
If you want to turn your video on.
Yay!
Hi, John.
Hey, folks.
What is
Real quick,
let me 3 o'clock in the morning where you are or something? How late is it?
It is 1:45.
Oh, good for you. My God.
Not so bad.
John, so I have a question for all of you. When you see the finished product from where you started, John was the original playwright on this production before Jeremy Keith Hunter was brought along, and John evolved out his own play separately that's still in the works. But so how satisfied are you with what you've seen tonight?
In terms of the
show,
what
what finally evolved? How do you feel about what transpired and what actually was presented to this audience of 30 people tonight?
It's hard to say, I suppose, because I still kind of feel in the midst of it, or still feel very close. Like I don't feel like I have any a sense of hindsight for it, I suppose. But it's been just like a really exciting and I think ongoing process as well, of learning a new way of working together. I would say I feel like geographically I feel very far away, but maybe emotionally and creatively not so much.
Do you feel like it accomplished what you all set out to do at the very beginning? Because when I first saw this, it seemed like a kind of amorphous attempt to bring the web, digital, Zoom, all the sort of the tools of the internet more completely into theater making. It didn't feel very focused at that point. It was in fact a totally different play. So how much of all of this do you guys feel? And I'm asking Rex and Rebecca this, John, you too. How much do you think you achieved what that initial impulse was?
It's a great. Go ahead, John.
Oh no, you go ahead, Rex.
My initial impulse was like many people's in the theater industry was, what makes it theater? And we did back in March some readings that were pre-recorded, some play readings that we posted on YouTube, and I was like, oh, these are great, but but not theater. You know, this is a cheap webisode. So I was really after like what makes it alive, and why does it need an audience? And so that led to this conversation of opening up the process and getting an audience really involved in the work, and that opened up the whole WhatsApp thing. And hi, Devon Moody's just joining us, and one of the actors in the show. So to that end, I feel like it's been pretty successful. I feel like the play feels alive. The play feels like an audience is gathered. You know, there's a certain sense of we have assembled. We're here together, even though we're digital. And to me, it feels like theater. It even when it goes wrong, it feels like theater. You know, like today's performance, I messed up something on the sound. It wasn't a technical thing. It was on my end. Devon, so sorry. So we even had a hiccup there that is like, well, that's live. You can't. You got to fix that in real time. So so yeah, I mean, I think boosting the audience involvement was the key to that, of getting an audience even more involved than just sitting there in the darkness watching you in the same room. Over the internet medium, having an audience like very involved was the key for me of making it more theatrical.
So Rebecca, what did it, you know, I was the goal to get the audience typing? I mean, was that sort of the initial, were you guys thinking about that idea, like that, how, and was the original idea that could the audience actually change the play in some way by the way they were involved or not? Or did you not want that level of control handed over to the audience?
I think that, like, to speak as an audience member specifically for this production, which, as you said, Peter, is like fundamentally different from what we were exploring back in May, I felt really guided by the production as an audience member, and I felt like my role was really clearly defined, which was really lovely. And I don't think that I necessarily could have changed the story in a fundamental way, but I knew that what I was contributing was just giving the actors more fuel. I love improv. That's like one of my big passions is improv performance. And it was really cool to see how Devon and Cormac navigated all of the various things that, all of the variables, literally, that the audience threw at them.
Mm.
Yeah, I think we wanted the audience to change the energy of the show, but not necessarily change the story of the show, right? Like in the moments of like, and of sharing that space with the audience, they get to like truly contribute to something we don't know, something that they will discover in that moment, but it always leads to the handoff back to the actors to carry on to the next part until we need the audience again to I don't know, to me it's a bit of a relay race of, you know, pass the baton to the audience, they carry that for a second, and then the next leg of the story is taken over by the actors, the following leg taken over by the audience.
Yeah, Devon, I'm curious, Devon Moody, you did a lovely job tonight.
Thank you.
I thought you know, your rendition of a Disney number was you know, a revelation. You can use that in the Crodad. But how much, you know, when you're reading off the gifts of the audience, how much are you keeping in your head, you know, that you have to both keep the narrative going, but also try and integrate what people are contributing? Is that a challenge? Is that an extra muscle you have to use, or do you feel as you do this that it's a very natural part of, you know, balancing the idea of you teaching a class and you're also having this increasingly intense discussion with your friend?
Well, I mean, it's definitely, practice helps with anything, of course. But I think I don't know. I just kind of, it does kind of just like first thing that comes to your mind kind of deal, you know? It's like you've already set the environment, you know, you've already set the parameters, you know, the pitch, if you will, of where you can play. And so that's kind of like, it's just on the back burner, just an influence to all of the thoughts that come, you know? So they're already going through this filter of like context. And then as the thoughts come, it's just like boom, boom, boom. Now, some gifts are harder than others, you know, just depending on where they come from or what they are, just relatability. But that's, you know, that's a crapshoot as well. So it's kind of like exhilarating too. Keeps you on your toes.
Yeah.
I have a question for Devon and for Peter of what was it like? What did you have to sort of shift in your own mental space? And this is really for John and Rebecca as well, just for everyone. What mental shift did you have to create or make, knowing that a critic is a part of the process?
Okay.
And same for you, Peter, of like, what mental shift did you create in your own writing process of knowing that you now have a deeper, long history with a piece? Sorry, Devon, you were going to say something.
Okay, so I'm gonna be honest. I didn't know who Peter was. Like for a majority of the time, I don't think it was until he started talking about questions or article. I think he like there was some jargon that happened, and I was like,
Who did you think I was?
I had no
What
idea.
did you think I was doing here?
I don't know. I was like, I don't know. Maybe he's like somebody in Celeste that I haven't met yet.
I think I was like Rex's dad.
I don't know. I thought you were doing some like independent work. That would be funny, Rex's dad. But I was just like, okay. And then I found out, and I was like, there was like a slight second of, is there a chance that I pop? Whatever, fuck it. So, and then I was like, what's up, Peter? So I think one time it's funny because like one time I was texting or like Cormac and I had like private messaging, and he asked us a question, and I was like, I thought I was just replying to Cormac, and I was like, yeah, something, dude. And then I realized that it's Peter, and I was like, my bad, I didn't mean to call you dude. And he was like, it's an honor to have been called dude. Okay.
Well, that goes to the that goes to the issue that Rex was sort of getting at, which is, you know, how do we talk to each other? That's basically, you know, it's so weird that, you know, actors, directors would think that they have to address a person in my job in some way other than the human terms they would use for any other human being. Like, I would prefer to be called Lord Marks because I mean, it's ridiculous. So part of my pleasure, in a way, Devon, was that I love knowing that you didn't know who the hell I was or what I was doing there, because that means I wasn't intruding on you, on what you were doing. Mm-hmm. You know, there are these legends that sort of get formulated. There are these strictures we all live by in this business, that critics walk in, you know, on the day of the performance and they render a judgment. You know, that's the duty of the critic. And in some ways, that's a very useful process, because you want to have an objective opinion, or someone who doesn't have an emotional investment in the production, right, to be able to tell you their singular opinion, whether it's, you know, informed or an idiot's opinion. You know, sometimes it happens both ways. Mm-hmm. But what I thought in this case was that because we're trying to lay bare other parts of what theater is at a moment when we can't have regular theater, and I have reviewed many of Rex's productions, or several, and I've reviewed even Rex on a stage, for God's sakes. So we've had this other kind of relationship. But yes, I would say in this case, I became emotionally connected to all of the people involved. I appreciated the incredible care and dedication that everyone has to their role in these productions, because without any one of the cogs all fitting together, the whole thing falls apart. That's what you learn. Everyone has to hold up their part of the bargain, or you don't have this lovely thing that we saw tonight. And I understood that sort of, you know, intellectually, but I didn't understand it probably emotionally. That this is what binds a production together. and when I wrote a story about this, about the whole thing, and I had to take a step back, but not really, because you guys had invited me so deeply in. I understood many of the things I was writing about much more clearly. I wasn't guessing at what I could say.
Right.
I really did feel like I had I'd been given a tremendous amount of information, which is, for a reporter, is a great thing.
You were a pleasure to have. I mean, and also it was useful to have somebody who wasn't in, when we were doing like the practices for the audience interaction, it was helpful to have somebody who in the same token wasn't emotionally invested. So that was like, pretty, at least to an extent, that was pretty cool as well.
Well, that's one thing I thought I could contribute was clarity. Sometimes I think you guys are so close to the material that it's you had a hard time. I thought that particularly when I watched, you had a hard time knowing how much teaching had to go on in a class. Mm-hmm. I thought that had gotten lost at a certain point, and just for the sake of sorry, I think I just upset Devon. He's walked out.
No.
Or he's back in the bathroom, which apparently is a theme. So anyway,
he's always doing it.
Yeah. So anyway, so but I didn't want to be a 10-ton fly on the wall. I wanted to be someone who was really in the background watching how you all interacted. And that was, and it was actually wonderful to see. One thing I wanted you to talk about, I was hoping you guys might talk about a little bit more, was in the midst of all this was the Black Lives Matter movement that really changed the whole course of the show. And I watched you all wrestle with that. I watched you all find a way to speak to that. And tonight, interestingly, I wrote down the words White House, because when Cormac reveals that Ashton worked at the White House, I suddenly thought, is he got COVID? I suddenly thought, that's how I felt that connected. It felt so right now. That's part of what you guys did, is with this format and working on these platforms, is it made it seem like, we're in the world of today. And I thought maybe the next line Cormac was going to say was, I hope he's okay. Or, I don't even know if he's okay, because, everyone in the White House now seems to have, been infected anyway. But that's just.
No, it was hard having a, writing something that essentially is trying to be right now, and then chasing whatever the right now is. Because, the news cycle changes so quickly. And so how do you rehearse something for a few weeks and still be relevant when you're trying to be so topically relevant? And I think ultimately we just agreed on some compasses of, we wanted the play to be cross-cultural. We wanted the play to be about intimacy, and we knew it had to be online through Zoom. And those were sort of big enough broad strokes that we could get current events in without having to be like, include the debate last night, type of thing.
Yes.
So this is you were talking earlier, Peter, about with Devon's comment of you being in the room and being able to offer a few thoughts. And because I would always say, like, well, if you're here, you got to work.
Right. Exactly.
So Rick Davis Rick Davis commented on the Facebook thing about the in-house critic role pioneered by G.E. Lessing in the 1760s is the origin of the profession of dramaturgy.
Right.
So like.
Right. Indeed. He's right. Good for you, Rick.
Yes. Thanks, Rick. But
Hi,
like,
Rick.
hi, Rick. Rick is the dean of the College of Visual Performing Arts at George Mason University. So he's bring all of our education up here.
And there is a history of, it's true, we've only, it's evolved into this kind of church and state thing, but, some of the great critics of the 20th century were practitioners. Harold Clurman is probably one of the best known critics in the world. Kenneth Tynan was a critic and became the dramaturg, essentially the literary manager at the National Theatre in London. It's a permeable wall. It's not a strict profession. It has, the definitions change, and
it seems to happen more in other art forms, right? Like poet, like in poetry, like all
critics, right?
All poem critics are poets, like
Hmm.
it happens a lot in the visual art world too, if people write about exhibitions, but there does seem to be the stronger, sometimes even hostile, us versus them,
Absolutely.
type spirit. And like, what, Peter, what do you have to do as a critic to sort of think about this in a new way? What is your process like of getting involved in a show, and still writing about it, and how is this repeatable? Because
right
you can't come to every rehearsal, but
of course,
but like,
well, part of the answer is how you guys react to it. You've seen that I'm a human being. That I don't, my motives, part of it for me is understanding what my motives are. It's not, I don't come in to take an axe to the theater. That's not my dream. My dream is to find things that other people would love. It's not, I don't. So somebody's thing was
echo there.
Yeah, but right. So that's number one. But it's also how you receive me into your environment that really is going to determine how I'm perceived and what I can do. Because the next time I see a Rex Daugherty production, or Solas Nua, or I see something Rebecca Walls directs, or John King writes, or Devon is singing in, the question is, how do you take it if I don't throw my hat in the air? When you know that it's not necessarily it's not a personal attack, or it's not something that's meant to make sure your mothers are crying in the morning. It's because I may have some judgment of my own, the way all of you have strong judgments about every show you see. How is that communication accepted? Is there more trust if you know the person is someone who is a human being and not an opinion machine?
Totally.
How do you accept that without feeling like that SOB just ruined my night?
Right. No, it's a great question, and it's I think one of the biggest complaints on the artistic side is like, well, they didn't get it.
Right.
And that's part of the problem of Artist Presents, the Theater Critic Responds, with no backstory, with no understanding of, well, here's what we were after. Can you, and like, did they do any research on their end before they wrote about it? Or so there's this like, well, like, they didn't get it, I think, is the big complaint. And of course, particularly when it's the Washington Post, there's weight to that. It's a big deal to be in the Post, and a good review can mean financial success, and a bad review can mean you're closing early sometimes. So like, of course it's personal, or like, of course it feels personal because
it's you, it's your life.
There's real consequences whether it's good or bad.
Right.
Yeah.
One thing that's not healthy, and I don't know what to do about this, is is the idea that one newspaper, one voice has that kind of sway. It's I didn't create this universe, this ecosystem.
Right.
I just sort of took advantage of it when I got hired. But it would be a much better world if there were, a gallery of voices that all were weighing in, and that all had credibility and stature. I don't know why human beings have erected this situation. I don't know why one thinks that because you're at the Washington Post, you necessarily know more than someone at a smaller publication. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I think that discerning people do not think that. I think discerning people, it's a very small, coterie of people.
Well, I wonder, like, to answer your question as well, of like, what happens when Peter writes a bad review for Rex Daugherty show, what follow-up is there possible after that? Is like, well, can I say, like, beyond like my comments in the thread, that who knows if Peter ever reads, but like, what follow-up is there is there the spirit of conversation? Because for me, if we're talking about craft and we're talking about technique and we're talking about theater making and clarity, I can talk about that non-personally. I can remove myself from like my need for the show to do well and my need to have, pats on my back or whatever, and just be like, well, was it clear? What did you see? And if not, then is there a conversation follow-up that could be printed?
Right.
Or is there the ability to tack on to the review online, at least, of post-show discussion that happened over email, and like you could curate and then put up, like, as far as like rethinking theater and like and criticism, like,
right,
to me it feels like what we've explored is the conversation is so viable, the conversation is so valuable for understanding perspectives, and of course, like, that's true for anything, right?
Right.
So like, is there possibility for a continued conversation even after a review is written?
I would question that maybe a little, just out of a sense of like there's sometimes being a gap between like the art you sometimes think you're making and the art you're actually making, or being able to talk about the art in different ways. Like, I don't know what happens when the conversation isn't happening in the art, right? When what happens around the art kind of supersedes, becomes tricky. Listening to you both there, I think there's something. I think some of the tensions maybe that sometimes comes up between art and criticism, I think, is or some of the complaints that you sometimes hear, I think, are around time. Well, yeah, two of them. One is around time. There's sometimes a sense that, like, however, like, you spend a year making something and then someone sees it once, and which is something a kind of something you're breaking down, right, with being a critic in the room, Peter, because you are spending the time with the work, so that's interesting, I think. But then also, I suppose you shouldn't have to see a show every night in order, you know what I mean? In order, so often something is being made to be experienced, and that experience.
Well, yeah. And I would say, John, that's a very interesting conversation to have. But you remember, just as I am sort of a flashpoint between the readers / audience and the artists, and the artists' demands for what they want is very different from what a consumer wants. These are not all, there is some segment of the population, maybe some of the people watching tonight, who want to understand those things. They want that in-depth conversation. And there's other people you're serving who just want to, shut up and just tell me if I should see this. So, there is a pressure, there are stress points here that have to be put in balance. And then you've got the additional problem that Rex alluded to at the very beginning, which is that we're an endangered species. We're not a growth industry in journalism. Criticism is highly fragile right now, because there are other aspects of what journalism does that get tremendously more clicks and looks and numbers. That isn't to say that the Washington Post doesn't value the arts; they do, but we have to. It would be grand if we had the luxury of an extended conversation with and you can do that. You can pick and choose. It's just hard to do that on every outing for everything that deserves it.
Sure.
Everything.
Sort of tied to this is another comment from Rick, where he says, the sports pages have highly skilled writers from multiple perspectives, game story, columnist features, and the arts are statistically a bigger segment of the economy than sports. So maybe front office management is part of the story. Peter, your response.
Yes. Well, Mr. Davis, Professor Davis, you're very, very challenging tonight. No, but I don't think that that's not true. There's not a full recognition at any level of society. We've seen this already. With we've seen this on the federal level with how, arts workers are treated in the economy, and whether or not they're worth supporting, as if the arts industry doesn't have this huge impact on just finances in this country. So yes, I do think we are underrepresented. And Rick, anytime you want to, come over and make the case, I will, once COVID goes away and we can actually have a meeting in the building, that would probably be the best way. I guess we could do a Zoom, but this would be a more cogent way to do it if you're ready.
I will help facilitate that.
Yes, I had a feeling.
I love that.
I had a feeling.
Let's get Rick into the front office at the Washington Post.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
So, one of the things I wanted to comment earlier of when Peter, that you said, what made things possible is how we received you, is that was symbiotic. And I remember in the workshop process, the actor, because you participated with us, you did dance warm-ups with us.
Yes.
You did music movement warm-ups with us, and you weren't just a fly on the wall. That, I think, would have been, if there's any of your colleagues, theater critics watching, or who might watch this later on Facebook, I think what you demonstrated is I want to understand this completely in my full body, and the actor's tool is their full body. And so when you did dance warm-ups with us, when you did our sort of emotional check-ins with us that we do at the top of rehearsals, you became one of the ensemble members. And that was a huge barrier knocked down from like, oh, Peter's sitting over there in the corner going to write about us. No, you were involved. And so like, I just think that was a two-way street of, you said it was how we received you, but we received you because you were so throwing yourself into the project.
That's really nice. I just hope there's no film of the day we put on grass skirts and did the hula. That would have been, that's blackmailable.
That's what happens the next time you give me a bad review.
Yeah, there you go. See, I knew there was a catch. But I will say this, I've been doing this a long time. I feel very comfortable trying to explore pushing some of the boundaries. I'm not so sure if you don't feel that level of a willingness to let go a little bit and go with the flow of what you were, give over control in a sense to you, which I told you at the beginning of this, Rex. I said, well, you're my director too, in a sense. I don't know if that made you nervous or what, but I was just trying to say to you, you're leading me into your world. You're letting me in. I am going to abide by your rules.
Right.
And the other rule I told everybody in the room was, you can tell me if there are things that really you object to my observing. I was fine if there were going to be private conversations. I didn't feel like my role was to be the scribe of everything that happened, unless that was the documentary agreement or the understanding or what you guys wanted to. So there was a lot of trust back and forth, I think, that really made a difference.
Yeah. And it was so interesting early in the process. You told me in a separate conversation you and I had about, well, I think of you as my director now. And you said that I was teaching you how to write about the piece.
Right.
And that was really mind-blowing. The other mind-blowing moment for me was after the workshop, after the play had like drastically changed in a week's time.
Right.
The very first play, you told me in an email, wow, watching you were there every day. And then you said, I've never understood the value of a workshop.
Right.
And my jaw hit the floor. I was like,
right.
Peter.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is such a huge part of playmaking.
Well, yes. And I see that. I knew it intellectually. I didn't understand it because I am brought in, when I do stories about plays, I'm brought in for 10 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour. That's what I get. And it's sort of just to grab a little bit of atmosphere for a story about the building of a play, but it's not really about the building of the play. It's just about being able to describe the people in the room when they're building a play, basically. So the idea of the transformation that happens collectively and how it's built, you probably, among you all, you probably could not go back and determine who did what particularly on any given day to make this thing move forward. That was what was stunning to me, to watch you all do that in your own ways, and by developing your own relationships, who felt with whom in the room when they came in, when Naveed was there and he would say like offhand things but that would have meaning, when the actors wouldn't feel comfortable saying things, or they would. Devon never had any problem. I didn't feel like saying anything. He was nor did Cormac. I felt they were very strong contributors to this process. But all that is something I finally understood, the difference even between a workshop and a rehearsal, which really wasn't that clear to me until watching how you guys put this together.
Yeah, well, it was so exciting, and I was just like, well, again, like, how do we open up this process more for critics to understand the value of what goes on in particularly a workshop, but of course over the rehearsal time.
Well, Zoom made that possible. Zoom was actually a hugely useful tool, because it didn't require us to all get together in a room somewhere in DC and get there every day, and and not be able to do other things because you were anyway.
That's a good thought moving forward, of even when we're back in an actual room, of like, well, maybe a critic can join through the laptop. Yeah.
Did you ever regret having me there? Any of you? Did you ever feel like all right already, this is, and I'm not asking this because I want you to like tell me, what I want to hear, but I just wondered if there was ever times, John or Rebecca or Devon or Rex, that you just felt like maybe, maybe this wasn't such a good idea, because what if it doesn't work out?
Absolutely. Especially, no, I'm just kidding.
All right.
And for me, maybe at the very beginning, just because everything was so uncertain, if that made sense, it was just another variable, I guess.
Right.
But once I met you, then I would say no.
Oh, well, that's good.
Yeah, and I guess I felt like, very much connected to Rick's comment from a few minutes ago. I felt like you were a dramaturg, a really invested dramaturg. And so it made perfect sense to me that you were there. And as has been commented on, that you were playing right along with everybody, removed any shadow of a doubt from my mind that you belonged and wanted to be there. It's really cool. It's an interesting paradigm shift, I think. Like,
indeed.
Yeah,
I agree. And I wonder if it isn't, I think long term, people out there will have to decide, readers and the like, but whether or not, chronicling a production is actually more useful to the process for everybody involved than, showing up one night and just writing 300 words and saying XYZ, goodbye.
Thinking about that, I was like, that's because in the same way that we were talking about like what that relationship does, I think it goes very much the opposite way as well. In terms of, I think it goes very much the opposite way as well in terms of how, as you were saying, how the critic views the process and how they've come to understand what it is and how it got to where it is that they're being presented. And so it's then at the same time as they're like understanding, because they understood that like they tried 15 different things, and then that was the thing that it was, and this came out of nowhere in the middle. It's I think it's kind of like it's an extension of that conversation, and I think it could be very interesting. But then I think the biggest thing that comes to my mind is the development of bias, which is exactly what we're trying to avoid, And so I think that being prolonged with something, the objectivity, while not completely is done with, but I'd say there's opportunity for it to diminish in terms of just as it's just a human thing we do,
Yeah, that's well said.
Thank you.
Here's a good question from someone in the chat, from Becca Bollinger, about bias, but she asked, Peter, when theaters open back up, do you see this experience changing how you write traditional reviews?
That's a great question, because I do think something's going to change. I think there needs to be a shift. I think this, and I don't, I'm not sure all my colleagues would agree. I'm still sort of contemplating that myself, but I feel, Becca, on the basis of having done this,
Hi guys.
I feel like on the basis of doing this, I want to have a deeper, more meaningful connection to the work I see. I feel it to begin with so many nights of the theater, but I want to be able to communicate that more deeply to readers in ways that are going to be meaningful to them. And I have to believe that this kind of process is going to lead me to some deeper understanding of that. And I don't know if that means more reviews in which the production has more involvement up front before we actually have the review run. I'm just not sure what shape that takes. But certainly it makes me feel much more also responsible to all of the contributors to a production and understanding how to attribute credit to who does what. That's one of the things that's the hardest thing to do in my job, is to figure out when you don't have this kind of involvement, sometimes I get notes from a choreographer saying, you said, what the director did, that was what I did, and how I don't know that there were no dances in the show and they had a choreographer. It's these things become very difficult to discern. And it's different with a new play than an old play. So even in those ways, in those less obvious ways, having this gives me a vocabulary to even ask questions going forward that I wouldn't have asked before.
Yeah, that's so. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I think it's interesting to consider like the way that publications such as the Washington Post typically writes about theater is either in a review format or in a feature format. And I think that the article that you wrote about this experience with Solus Nua is something fully different than that, and like really reminds me of more of the types of pieces that I would see on HowlRound, which are writing about the craft of theater.
Right.
And so I would hope that an interest in the writing about the craft of theater is what propels folks like you to do more investigations like this, right? It's an investigative piece instead of an advertisement or a review, right? Yeah.
Yes, and thank you for all your IRS tax returns. That was very helpful for the financial expose that's yet to come. But yes, I appreciate that, Rebecca, and I do think, yes, I think this is a much more satisfying piece to write, any day of the week than a cursory, what feels by comparison very cursory sometimes in the way I have to write about theater.
Peter, was there something, your previous comment about starting to sift of like, oh, that was a choreographer's job, or oh, that was that.
Right.
Going back even further, like we all wanted to demystify this process a little. Right. Was there something you learned about who does what on a show? Or I know you've commented like, I can see how collaborative it truly is, but was there a greater sort of understanding of, oh, this is what a director does, and this is more about what an actor does besides,
Well, certainly, Rex, in a devised piece of theater like this, which was really a collectively developed, and you had two playwrights involved who were incredibly generous and, didn't feel very protective, maybe about the eventual words they wrote, but both John and Jeremy were, so open. I thought that there was an exchange that happened that helped me see, for example, how influential the director can be. It really was you decide. I understood much more that the director, is really toggling or pushing the accelerator pedal to the degree to which he or she or they want to have the piece go their way. And I thought you were very good at pulling back from that and making me see that the director can be sometimes a very secondary contributor, or sometimes, full throttle, pushing the narrative in a direction, especially when you're devising work.
Right.
And that is that made me understand that it's not, I tended to blame or praise the director above all other participants, because it was just an easy catch-all when you don't know. You just go, well, the guy at the top, the guy who's right, the biggest, the biggest lettering, largest type face gets the most ink. But I realized that that is, it's much more nuanced than that. And I have to pay attention when something is, for example, a character-driven piece or a movement-driven piece, or a design-driven piece, to understand who might have taken the, the biggest swing, or the most important swings, or the ones that, really deserve more discussion.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It is, I mean, particularly with a new play, it is, whether it's devised or whether it's even just a traditional, like, well-made play that is brand new, I still feel like that is a very collaborative process in the best versions of it. In there are plenty of versions where it is like very director driven, and it's like, you're gonna all do this. But yeah, to me,
I also thought, I just want to say, to answer the other part of to go a little farther.
Yeah, go ahead.
That, I was also amazed, you would, the mystery remained, when John or Jeremy would go away for a night and the next day would have their new material that Devon or Solomon before Devon, or Cormac or Josh before Cormac had to digest and make their own. There is this still, this kind of unfathomable part. It's not like I understand it all. There are some parts of it that are a mystery to me. What synapses work in the hours when you guys aren't together that put things together so that it can progress,
right,
outside of any one person's or the group's, let's say, input. It does come down to those inspirations that are not apparent, and that still is a lovely kind of enchantment part of this thing.
Right, because I mean, this was a devised process, but it was a bit more script driven still. And so, yeah, there were nights, especially in workshop, where John or Jeremy would like, all right, go away, come up with new pages tomorrow, and I'm reading them at the same time as the actors. And so that was, I don't know, for this process, it felt right that more people sort of contributing on the how, which, if you think about, the director's job is usually how the story is told. The playwright's job is what the story is, right? But with this new medium, I thought, well, I don't know all the answers of how to do a Zoom play. So like, if more of us are contributing to that, then we'll all look smarter and better for it. And so that was not just, I don't know, I guess like everyone having a turn in the driver's seat was beneficial for this project.
I definitely agree with that, Rex. And I think especially because, as you were saying, like the medium is new, or it's kind of like something to be pioneered and discovered. What that really did was foster a lot of space for the ratio of like collaboration in terms of like where everybody's extended, and especially because we're not in the same place as well, because you're not here with the computer that I have and things like that. So that was, I think, the very base level of like, okay, already you're in a different space. And so that's going to be something that you need to foster, and something that you need to assimilate to the needs of what the story is. And as well as how just technical elements worked, with building it, and that is one thing I felt as well too. Like it felt more inviting. And so because I felt that it was like, this is really, everybody's kind of supporting this thing, everybody's holding it down. So which was like really cool, because sometimes I would feel some kind of way about something and I was like, but no, like this is gonna serve it. So that was a really cool element to feel too. Not that I didn't have to be like, but so that was cool.
Right on. Well, we're about at an hour, so we'll wrap up here. But Peter, any sort of last thought on your end of like, here's what you're thinking about moving forward? I love that you're still sort of in process of how this will change your traditional reviews, but I don't know, like what else is there in the world of rethinking how to get involved, how to
Hey, folks, he's sucking me dry here.
Oh, there he is.
No, it's like he's squeezing every drop. out of this. You know, Rex is, you know, this is what Rex is like in a rehearsal room, everyone. This is
There she is!
yeah.
And Solomon provided the interpretive dance for it.
Okay, there you go. Oh my God. Anyway, sorry, he's squeezing me dry.
Well, I guess I'm just asking what's next. You know, like send us out on the thought of, you know, you're gonna write a piece about this, right? You're writing a review on this. I can't wait to read it. Maybe we have a conversation about it.
I'm not sure what I'm gonna write yet, Rex. It may be something, you know, again, non-traditional. I'm not so sure I want to approach it the way I would every other review. I want to talk maybe more personally about, you know, how this piece affected me. The thing I would leave you with is, I think this is for me, it's a vote in terms of, you know, all of us keeping our heads together, knocking our heads together and figuring out how to make theater exciting for other people to experience, either through journalism or through Zoom or through you know, the spaces that you stage your plays on. So that is that's a commitment. You're keeping me excited about what I do. So maybe that's the best takeaway at this point.
I love that because, you know, for me, it's similar, is that really the artist and the critic are trying to serve the same audience. You know, we're all about the audience. We're nothing without an audience, without readers and without viewers. We are alone in a Zoom. So I think understanding same team, you know, like, hey, we're all playing on the same team here, is really helpful. And just coming from this place of, how do we have a mentality of abundance and not scarcity, and how do we just continue to invite people in? How do we be more inclusive in all of our practices? So something, you know, I'm thinking about in a myriad of ways, and some, I'm sure you are too, Peter.
Yeah, no, that's it. And I thank you all for letting me play with you. It was really instructive, and I think the story bore that out. And, you know, it's all about, for reporters, it's really about the story, and you gave me a great story, so thank you.
Well, thank you. Your constant curiosity was such a gift, I think, for the room. And personally, I'm really excited to see who you do this with next, and how this goes to next. Like, what company in DC will you reach out to next? Like, is it Theater Alliance with Raymond Caldwell? Shout out to Raymond. You know, like, and particularly also in the small theater world of where we are able to experiment a lot more than our dear friends with buildings.
Yeah, no, in that way it was more rewarding too. You know, that was part of the fun too. It wasn't about, you know, it didn't have to be the largest company. It just had to be a really, you know, committed and interesting company.
Yeah, well, again, I appreciate the time, and I can't wait to see what's next.
Thank you.
All right, team. And thanks, John, Rebecca, and Devon for joining us. And thanks, everyone, for watching, and all of you who joined here in the chat. If you want to see this video again, it'll be up on our Facebook Live, and keep the conversation going there. You can ask questions in the chat there, and we will continue to talk about the future of theater and criticism. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great night.